Everyone knows the phrase, the Midas touch. We use it for someone who turns everything they handle into success, into gold. But almost no one remembers that in the original story, the golden touch was not a blessing at all. It was a curse, and it nearly destroyed the man who wished for it. King Midas got exactly what he asked for and discovered far too late that it was the worst thing that could ever have happened to him. This is a story about getting precisely what you want and what that can cost you. Because the golden touch did not make Midas happy. It left him unable to eat, unable to drink, and at last it turned the one thing he truly loved into cold, dead metal in his arms. How does a wish come true become the cruelest punishment of all? That is the question at the heart of this story. So tonight you'll hear the real tale of King Midas, the wish that doomed him, the desperate way he was freed, and a second foolish mistake that left him with a secret he could never hide. If you enjoy these stories, take a moment to subscribe. It genuinely keeps this channel alive, and tell me in the comments which myth you'd like next. Now settle in and let's meet the king who loved gold a little too much. Midas was the king of Phrygia, a wealthy land in the region of Asia Minor, and he was already by any measure an enormously rich man. His palace was full of treasure, his storerooms overflowed, and he was famous for his magnificent gardens, where roses grew in such abundance and beauty that travelers spoke of them across the world. Midas had, in short, everything a man could reasonably want. But Midas was not a reasonable man when it came to wealth. He loved gold, loved it with a single-minded passion that went far beyond need or sense. To him, gold was the most beautiful thing in the world, the measure of all value, the one thing you could never have too much of. No matter how much he already possessed, he always wanted more. And so, when fortune handed him a chance to gain more gold than he had ever dreamed of, Midas did not stop to think. He did not weigh the consequences or imagine how it might go wrong. He saw only the gleam of more, and he reached for it with both hands. It began, as these things often do, with an act of kindness, one of the few genuinely good things Midas ever did, and the strange reward that came of it. One day, Midas's servants found an old man asleep in the famous rose gardens, drunk and lost and far from home. The old man was Silenus, the elderly companion and foster father of the god Dionysus, the god of wine. Rather than treating the wanderer harshly, Midas recognized who he was and treated him with great kindness, taking him in, entertaining him hospitably for several days, and then returning him safely to Dionysus. The god was deeply grateful to have his old friend back unharmed, and to reward the king's hospitality, Dionysus offered Midas a gift. "Name anything you wish," the god told him, "and it is yours." It was the kind of offer that, in these stories, almost always ends in disaster, because mortals, given an open wish, so rarely understand what they are truly asking for. And Midas, with all the treasure of Phrygia already at his feet, did not hesitate. "Grant me this," he said, "that everything I touch may turn to gold." Dionysus, the old stories say, was reluctant. He could see what the king could not, and he may even have tried to warn him. But Midas was certain, and a god keeps his word. And so the wish was granted. From this moment, Dionysus told him, "All that you touch will become gold." Midas went away rejoicing, the happiest man alive, for about a day. At first, it was everything Midas had dreamed of. Hardly daring to believe it, he reached out and touched a low branch of an oak tree, and the branch turned at once to solid gold, gleaming in the sunlight. He touched a stone, and it became a nugget of gold. He brushed his hand against the earth, against the pillars of his palace, against an apple from a tree, and each of them transformed instantly into precious, shining metal. The king was beside himself with joy. He moved to his palace, touching everything in sight, turning his furniture, his doors, his statues all to gold, watching his already vast wealth multiply with every step he took. He was, in that first giddy hour, surely the richest being who had ever lived, growing richer with every single thing he laid a finger upon. Everything he had ever wanted was suddenly, literally, at his fingertips. He must have felt like a god himself. But Midas, in his excitement, had not yet stopped to think about what it actually means for everything you touch to turn to gold. He had not considered that the gift made no distinction, that it did not know the difference between the things he wanted to transform and the things he desperately needed to leave alone. He was about to find out. And the discovery would come at the dinner table. Flushed and delighted from his afternoon of transformation, Midas sat down to eat, as a man does, hungry after so much excitement. He reached for a piece of bread, and the moment his fingers closed on it, the bread turned to hard, inedible gold. Puzzled, he reached for a piece of meat, and it too went stiff and golden and cold in his hand. He lifted a cup of wine to his lips, and as the liquid touched his mouth, it hardened into metal. And the terrible truth of his wish came crashing down on him. He could not eat. He could not drink. Everything he brought to his mouth, every morsel of food and every drop of water, turned to gold the instant he touched it, and a man cannot live on gold. The most precious substance in the world, the thing he had loved above all else, had become his prison. Surrounded by mountains of treasure, the richest man alive, Midas began, slowly and certainly, to starve. The gift had become a death sentence. And as the horror of his situation sank in, as he realized he might die of hunger and thirst in the middle of all his gold, the king who had loved wealth more than anything began, for the first time in his life, to hate the very sight of it. But the cruelest blow had not yet fallen. In the most famous and heartbreaking version of the story, Midas had a young daughter whom he loved dearly, perhaps the one thing in the world he loved more than gold. Seeing her father in such distress, the girl came to him, not understanding what had happened, and reached out to comfort him. And Midas, in his misery, forgot. For one instant he forgot the curse that was upon his hands, and he embraced his daughter, folding her into his arms as any father would, and at his touch, she turned to gold. The warm, living child became a cold, golden statue in his arms, perfect and gleaming and utterly lifeless. In that moment, Midas understood, completely and finally, what he had done. The gift he had begged for, the wealth he had prized above all else, had now taken from him the one thing that truly mattered. He stood holding a golden statue where his daughter had been, the most precious object in his entire treasury, and at the same time the most worthless, because no amount of gold could ever be worth what he had lost. The king who had wanted everything to turn to gold had gotten his wish, and it had cost him his child. Broken at last, Midas lifted his golden hands to the heavens and begged the god to take the terrible gift away. Dionysus, hearing the king's desperate prayers, took pity on him, for Midas had truly learned his lesson. In the hardest way a man can learn anything. The god told Midas how the curse could be undone. He was to go to a certain river, the river Pactolus, and there to wash his hands in the running water, to let the flowing river carry the golden power out of him and away. Midas hurried to the river and plunged his hands beneath the surface, and the magic flowed out of him into the water. The power left his body, and as it did, the very sands of the river turned golden, glittering with the gold that washed out of the king's hands, and to this day, the old storytellers said, that river runs rich with flecks of gold, a permanent mark left by the day a king was cured of his terrible wish. Midas returned home, and his daughter, in the gentler versions of the tale, was restored to life, the gold draining out of her as it had drained out of him. The king had been given back everything he had nearly lost, and he had been changed. He no longer cared for gold. He had learned at terrible cost that the things that matter most cannot be bought or hoarded or turned to metal, and that a man who already has enough and still craves more is courting his own ruin. You might think that would be the end of his troubles. But Midas was a slow learner, and he had one more foolish mistake left in him. Having lost his taste for gold, Midas turned away from wealth and came to love the simple countryside, the woods and fields, and the wild god of nature, Pan. And it was this that led him into his second great folly. There was a musical contest held between Pan, playing his rustic reed pipes, and the great god Apollo, master of the lyre, a contest to decide who was the finer musician. When it was over, everyone agreed that Apollo, the god of music himself, had won. Everyone, that is, except Midas. Foolishly, stubbornly, the king spoke up and declared that he preferred Pan's piping, that the rough music of the reeds had pleased him more than the golden notes of Apollo's lyre. It was not a wise thing to do, to insult a god to his face over a matter of his own art. And Apollo, offended, decided that any man with ears so poor as to prefer Pan's piping did not deserve the ears of a human being. With a touch, he transformed Midas's ears into the long, furry ears of a donkey, a mark of the king's foolishness growing right out of his own head. Midas was horrified. He hid the ears beneath a large turban and managed to keep them secret from everyone in his kingdom. Everyone, that is, except one man, the servant who cut his hair. The king's barber was sworn to secrecy on pain of death, and for a long time he kept the secret faithfully. But it was a tremendous secret to carry, and it gnawed at him until he felt he would burst if he could not tell someone. At last, unable to bear it any longer, the barber went out to a lonely riverbank, dug a small hole in the ground, and whispered the truth down into the earth. King Midas has the ears of an ass, and then covered the hole over, feeling relieved, certain the secret was safely buried at last. But the earth does not always keep a secret. In that spot, a bed of reeds grew up, and when the wind blew through them, the reeds whispered the words the barber had spoken into the ground. King Midas has ass's ears, over and over, for anyone passing to hear. And so the king's foolishness was broadcast to the whole world after all. The two halves of Midas's story rhyme with each other in a way the Greeks clearly enjoyed. Twice, this king let a foolish desire run away with him. First a greed for gold, then a stubborn pride about his own judgment, and both times he was punished in a way that fit the folly exactly. Be careful what you wish for, his story says, because you just might get it, and be humble about what you think you know, because the truth, like those whispering reeds, has a way of coming out in the end. If this is the kind of story you want more of, take a moment to subscribe and tell me in the comments which myth I should tell next. Sleep well.